Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you all again here for a second event of the Center for Politics and the People this fall. My name is Brian Smith, Professor of Religion, and on behalf of my colleague and co-director of the Center for Politics and the People, Professor Henrik Schatzinger of the Politics and Government Department, I'd like to welcome you to a panel discussion on the current state of democracy in French-speaking Africa. The year 1990, by and large, sounded the death knell of the one-party system in Africa. Democracy and elections have come to the forefront of the public debate in Francophone Africa. In the wake of the search of a new social contract, human rights and good governance have gained a renewed interest with a plurality of political parties and civil society movements who persistently fight against great odds, often at the peril of their lives. However, the transfer of power as a result of fair and transparent elections accepted by all parties, which is a sine qua non for the rule of law, is not always a smooth process in Francophone Africa. These three panelists to my right, all hailing from West African countries where they grew up, will now take a close look at the state of the art of democracy in Francophone Africa. They highlight the challenges in the consolidation of democracy, and also the hopes permitted in light of the socio-political change perceived by some political pundits as a breakthrough. Maître Guy Herve Kam, who is sitting in the center, is a former, no, I'm sorry, to my right, to my right, I'm sorry, to my right, far right, pardon me, Guy. He is a former judge and lawyer at the Burkina Faso bar. He is currently a visiting law professor at the Faculty of Law and Political Science at the Premier University of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. Maître Kam is a nationally and regionally recognized civil society activist and leader committed to social justice in Africa, often at the risk of his life. In 2006, he resigned his position as a judge in Burkina Faso to expose both high corruption in the judicial system and a lack of independence of the justice system due to political interference. In 2010, with three other activists, he initiated a petition to prevent the then president from changing the Constitution to remove the limits to the terms of the presidency. The petition succeeded in mobilizing people on the necessity for the respect of the Constitution. Maître Kam is also the spokesperson for La Belle Citoyenne, or the Citizen Broom, a civil society organization whose main objective is to foster the engagement of the populations for good governance, a climate of accountability on the part of the government, and the entrenchment of effective democratic change of government. La Belle Citoyenne is one of the organizations that spearheaded the popular uprising in Burkina Faso on October 30th and 31st, 2014, just a year ago, which led to the ouster of former President Blaise Compaoré after 27 years of dictatorship. With Maître Kam, we'll have a first-hand account of the revolution that took place in Burkina Faso that has given so much hope to other French-speaking African countries still in the throes of incomplete consolidation of democracy. Also from Burkina Faso is Associate Professor Touorizou Herve Some of the college's Educational Studies Department, who is our moderator today in the center. He has published more than 15 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters addressing educational policy and higher education finance in Africa. Through several op-ed pieces, he has actively taken part in the resistance against the regime of the former president, who wanted to change the constitution in Burkina Faso in order to remain in power indefinitely. He has been recognized as a national hero in Burkina Faso by the most popular online journal there, La Faso Net, after the popular uprising led to the collapse of the former regime a year ago. And finally, to your far right, your far right, Jean-Blaise Samou from Cameroon, Assistant Professor of French and Francophone Studies here at Ripon College, where he also teaches courses in global studies and politics. His research interests include post-colonial theory, post-colonial France and the Francophone political discourse, analysis and memory, historiography, and the construction of national identities in Africa. His articles have appeared in Analyse, Présence, Francophone, Revue de l'Université de Moncton, and the Canadian Journal of African Studies. He is currently working on the representation of political power in African films and media. So now I give the chair to our Professor Some, who will be moderator for the panel.
Thank you very much all for coming to listen to our talk about democracy, hopes, and challenges in Africa, in Francophone Africa. This is a very germane topic for liberal arts colleges who are turning the eye toward the global world. We are going to talk about Francophone Africa, where we come from. And this may sound weird if we look at the word itself. Guy Herve comes from Burkina Faso, alongside me. Jean-Blaise comes from Cameroon. We do not just speak French. We speak, for example, in Cameroon, more than 250 languages. And in Burkina Faso, that is a smaller country, we speak 65 languages. But how come that we talk about Francophone Africa? So, I mean, this is not the topic of today, but I just want you to think about, the importance of France in the life of these former colonies. These colonies are very different, very diverse in terms of geography, in terms of the economy, even in terms of the populations. But we have a commonality, that is the colonial legacy. And this colonial legacy still acts deeply working through our institutions. So I will start by talking about history, how we came to be where we are in terms of democracy in Africa, in Francophone Africa. We, after the colonization, were literally given, in the 60s, there was a way of independences that were literally given by France, to the exception of Algeria, that went into a very active war with France, and with the exception of Guinea of Sékou Touré, who decided that he was not going to work within the French community. Most African countries, African countries, decided to wait for France to give them independence. So when independence was given, there was a great hope in all over the countries. And Lumumba, who was finally assassinated just 1 year after, he applauded the new era of Africa that was opening up, said that with this, our nations were going to be consolidated. Progress was really going to be something that was going to be enhanced. Finally, what happened after the independences in the 1960s was the one-party system that took over everything in Africa. Most countries, I mean, there was a kind of national mystique that wanted to make us believe that with the one-party system, we were going to be one people, one nation, and we were just triumphantly walking towards freedom. And this resulted in repression of the people who had different voices. And in 1963 started the first coup d'etat in Africa, with what happened in Togo, where the first democratically elected president, Sylvanus Olympio, was assassinated. I talked earlier about the fact that Mobutu killed Lumumba in 1961. And in 1966, there were coup d'etat in Burkina Faso and in many other countries. So this means that the hope that had been created at the beginning of our independences had been stalled, actually. We would have to wait for the 1990s with the fall of the wall of Berlin. Now I'm confused. Is it Berlin or Berlin? Berlin, yes. With the fall of the wall of Berlin, and with perestroika and everything, with this era started now the talk of democracy by France itself. France now recognized that development was not possible outside, democracy. And again, this democracy was kind of top-down, top-down fashion decreed by France when France and African Francophone countries met at La Bourg in 1990. I must say that there is a very special relationship that links Africans, Francophone Africans, with their former colonies, unlike the colonies of Great Britain. So every year they meet, and I don't know what they talk to each other, but they do meet, and many critics don't take a deep view at this kind of encounter that is kind of condescending, because it cannot be done on equal footing. So in the 90s then, the great hope came back again with the democratic conditionality that was now a new concept. And whether it was the World Bank or the IMF or France, they now condition help to democracy. Aid can only be given if countries were ready to go for democracy. Of course, the smarter regimes went into step with this new music, and they knew what they could do after that. Most of the time, they accepted, they organized all the kind of fanfare of elections, but finally, they entrenched themselves in power. The case for Ivory Coast, for example, and the case for many other countries. But the countries that were not smart enough, they resisted, the tide, and they lost power. I'm talking about the case of, for example, of Mali. And finally, when we take a larger picture of this, and a larger look at this, we have been disappointed with this kind of new hope, because it did not go anywhere. Many of the regimes that we didn't like managed to entrench themselves in power. So this looks like it's a grim picture, but we can talk about hope. I mean, the gains that we have had so far do not look bright, but if you look at the glass as half full, there is a lot to celebrate. And this lot to celebrate is also the international community that involves itself in democracy. Because before, this sacrosanct idea of not interfering, from my point of view, was criminal, because if you look at somebody who is in danger and you're not interfering, no matter what a beautiful, magnificent concept that you come up to justify your silence, you are also, complicitous in the situation. So today, the international community is really working towards helping people to really embrace democracy, and also the people in the countries, in Francophone countries, are very wide awakened, especially the youth and the civil society that do not want to be, taken for a ride. 2 minutes. Oh, I guess it took. So, for example, the civil society in many countries, they are not just working within in silos. They are also communicating. They are talking among themselves and among the different countries. And this is a powerful, momentum that we are having, aided with the new technologies of information and communication. So things are really not going to be like they were before. No petty tyrant is going to entrench himself in power so easily. Of course, we are talking about situations that are not very clear-cut, but there is really reason for hope. Yeah. So after this, I will give the floor to, yes, Guy Herve, who is going to talk about his involvement in the political movement in Burkina Faso that led to the downfall of Blaise Compaoré, who reigned for 27 full years. And he is the representative, he's the spokesperson of the Ballet Citoyen, who is a movement of the civil society who was at the forefront of the battle against Blaise Compaoré, who was trying to change the constitution to remain indefinitely in power.
Thank you, Blaise. Thank you all. I apologize because my English is not very good, but I will do the best to be understood. When we talk about the uprising in Burkina Faso, sometimes I ask the question, how can an insurrection that stopped the vote of a law be considered as the success story of democracy? Normally, it is not a success story. We elect a deputy in the National Assembly to vote law, and then where they wanted to vote this law to change the constitution, the insurrection happened. But the situation was that Blaise Compaoré, who was the president for 27 years, tried to confiscate the sovereignty of the people. How as he did that? He tried to weaken all the opposition power of the country, like political party, civil society organization, traditional leaders, by corruption or violence. By corruption and violence. Then he made all the institutions work for him. He was, like Barack Obama said, a strong man in the power, where African people need a strong institution. And in 1991, when the constitution has been adopted, the presidential term was limited to 2. And in 1997, he changed the constitution to remove the limitation, and then he could be candidate as he won. But 1 year later, in 1998, after the political party, the civil society, he tried to have all the media with him. And the most important journalist, Norbert Zongo, has been assassinated, and then lead the country to a crisis. To resolve the crisis, he changed the constitution again and set up the limitation. So normally, it could not be, it could not run again for presidential. But the Constitutional Court was working for him, and they judged that he could do it. And in 1995, he ran again for presidential mandate, and even with this change, he could not be candidate in 2015. But since the last election in 2010, they start discussion for the change of the constitution to consolidate the democracy. But we know the only problem was the presidential term limitation. They wanted to remove that again. All the intellectual and the young people who were not part of the political party because of the ideological consideration were not important for us. As Blaise talked about French colonization, all the African leaders, they studied in French, and they were there in an association which tried to learn them the ideological consideration, left, right, when the United States, URSS, Russia, yes. Then we are not part of that. We are not part of the colonization. We are free-minded. We are free-minded, and we start to organize ourselves in the country and to say to all the politicians that we cannot accept another change of the constitution. For us, the most important was to have the possibility to change the president, so all the politicians, their main objective is not to remain in power, but we can start after this to talk about the development of our country, because before all the political discussion in the country was around the question of election. That's why we try with a new leadership, with the innovative way of action, like using the social network, the community radio, the community radio, to mobilize people in the country, even in not the small part of the country, the village. We try to explain them that the question is not to know if the president is good or not, but the question is to be able, when you come as president, you get in power, you try to do what you can do and you let the place to another person. But in Africa, generally, the presidents in power are all the army with him. That was the case in Burkina Faso. But the difference, in Burkina Faso, we have a national army. We are not, in some countries, the army is dominated by some ethnic people. So the army, all the army are from one region. We didn't have that. So it was easier for us to face the army because the problem was only political problem, not religion problem, not ethnical problem, that it may be the case in other countries. And from October 21st, 2011, when the president took the decision to remove, we start civil disobedience, and with 4 main activities. The first was the protest of the women on the 27th. The second, the protest of the political party on 28th, and the third was the protest of the civil society organization. The 3rd of October was the day the National Assembly should adopt the modification of the Constitution. And this day, the President has been ousted of the power, and on 31st, he resigned for the power. And we try to have a transitional regime for 1 year. The transitional regime organized election last year on November 2015, and now we have a new president that has been elected by fair election. The hope for us is the new generation of African countries is not influenced by the colonization, is not influenced by all this ideological consideration. Our main objective is the development of our country with international community as friendly, as friend for the development. The example of this importance of international community has been the position of the U.S. Embassy in Burkina Faso. Not because I'm here, but the day we installed the new president, when the U.S. Embassy get in the room, he has been standing ovation because during the fight against the modification of the constitution, their position was clear. We don't want strong man, we need strong institution. Thank you.
Can I a quick comment on the images? Otherwise, you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, this is President Blaise Compaoré. He's an angelical figure, but yeah, he murdered a lot of his citizens. So you can see the Francophone countries in blue, and you see the very many and very diverse. And but they share the same currency with those countries. Apart from Algeria, they share the same currency, but this currency cannot be spent. And this currency comes in with one condition. Half of our export reserves are deposited in the French Parisian bank, so that our currency can be pegged to the Parisian, to the French money, now the euro too. So you can see the kind of umbilical link that enslaves us in a way. Cameroon, the Republic of Congo, Gabon, DRC, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Togo, Guinea, but Guinea has a special money because a special currency because they were kind of more belligerent and decided to walk away in 1960. Yeah, even Djibouti, that is at the far east, is also from the country and it has the same CFA. But we cannot spend our CFA in Djibouti. I cannot spend my CFA in Cameroon. So it looks like kind of monkey money, actually. Yeah, this is the journalist that was murdered in 1988 because he did not shut his mouth. And they wanted to give him a lot of money and he resisted corruption. So the only thing that they could do was to eliminate him.
Would you please translate the signs?
Okay, no amnesty to the murderer, to the assassins. And this is after the coup, because because of time we didn't talk about this. After the transition, in the course of the transition, people from the old regime were still within the system in a way. They did not lead a conspicuous role, but they still hold the power, especially the army. We had what I think army is not right because the presidential guard, 1,300 people to guard one person in the country, and they were really pampered. They were making the rest of the army very jealous. And if you did not pay attention, they would come at home and take you in the night and you disappear. But he has to give up. And these are, it's not a film. They are shooting people like this when you hear the machine gun. But he has to give up. We have seen too much. This is the national anthem, and the good thing of this is that this situation really brought the whole people together, and there was a renewed sense of patriotism. This is one of the ballet citoyens. He's a rapper, Smokey. His name is Smokey, and he was one of the leaders of the ballet citoyen. Blaise will not escape the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Here, I mean, I have goosebumps when I see this. I mean, he was there, and you will see, you can't see him himself, but because the demonstrators, shielded him, covered his body, so that at least even if they could be killed, he could be protected. You see, these are, see, this looks like, what do you call it? Air to soil and to air arms. When a dictator, uses his power in order to enslave the people have the right to go out to stand up and take away the power. Now, the women, have been instrumental in this fight, and symbolically in Africa, when these women walked with this instrument that is made for food, we knew that the system was really going to go, down the drain, because we don't play with women when they will go out with this instrument. Yes. So for me, it was an omen for Blaise Compaoré, and he knew that. We don't want a presidency for life. And here, we soldiers are discussing with people because they're being won over, actually. When he was talking to the chief of staff, so now the question was to tell the chief of staff should go and tell Blaise Compaoré to go away. There was no compromise anymore. This is the National Assembly, and now there's a lot of discussion about making it, leaving it the way it is as a museum, because it got burned down. Yes, a museum for democracy. Blaise Compaoré is worse than Ebola. The people is in danger. Let us disinfect ourselves from this guy. So I will ask Jean-Blaise to entertain us about the situation of democracy in Central Africa. We said that we shared this commonality, that is the Frenchness, but there are also many differences. So the democratic process in Central Africa bears its own originality.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Since we don't have enough time left, I think I will just go very, very fast. What is different between the situation in West Africa and the situation in Central Africa? There was a great hope that the fall of Blaise Compaoré would actually irradiate all the countries in Central Africa. But as soon as Blaise Compaoré was ousted, head of state in the rest of the French-speaking African countries, they started thinking about strategies to remain in power. Some other presidents who were already thinking of modifying their constitution in order to remain in power, they offered their people, especially in Togo, for example, and even in DRC, they offered their people the possibility to just remove that, to maintain the limitation of terms. And in Togo, it saved the president's term. The situation in Gabon, for example, and in Cameroon was different, because in Cameroon, the president was smart enough to anticipate because he had changed the constitution 2 times in 1996 and in 2001, and in 2001, long before the fall of Blaise Compaoré, he had already removed that limitation of term. Now, there is another aspect that I would like to emphasize here to explain how or why these dictators remain in power in Cameroon, in French-speaking Africa for so long. And I would like to first talk about the France-Afrique. I don't know if you've heard about the concept of France-Afrique. Come on. Okay, so the term France-Afrique is actually used in a pejorative manner to refer to France's neo-colonial relationships with the leaders of its former African countries. And there's a very powerful book about it written by François-Xavier Verschaff called La France-Afrique, le plus long scandale de la République. And there are other films and other scholarly research on this topic. So, how does France-Afrique work? These are the characteristics of France-Afrique. The illegitimacy of power, because France interferes heavily to designate the African political, economic, and military leaders. For example, in Côte d'Ivoire, recently, the first president of Côte d'Ivoire was designated by France, the second president, the third president. So it's absolutely impossible at this time for somebody in French-speaking Africa to become president without having partnered with France. It happens sometimes in the history in French-speaking Africa, but very quickly France managed to oust those people. The consequence is that there is political stagnation due to corruption and dictatorship, because at some point, when you've been designated by France, it means you have to be loyal to France, and therefore they do not care about their people, and they don't care about alternation in power. And also there is this political and economic dependency towards France. Professor Sommet talked about the fact that the currency that we use in French-speaking Africa, which is called the CFA franc, it actually means the currency of the CFA means colonial French-speaking Africa. So it's the currency that was designed by France and imposed upon this country, and so there is a continuous dependency between these countries and France. And also there's very little social achievements, because since these presidents, they know that they can be protected by France, they don't care about their people, and therefore they don't really build anything in their countries. And then there is a lack of contact between the people and the elite. So another aspect, this is an issue of L'Express, one of the main newspapers in France that talks about the France-Afrique. And this picture on my right shows how France actually benefits from that system. Okay. So, and the France-Afrique is maintained by the military system that France developed in Africa. This map shows us where France has developed military base in Africa, and you can see here in Gabon, in RCA, in Jamena, in Mali, then in Dakar, in Abidjan right here, and in Djibouti. And the reason is because if there is a problem, for example, if the president of Cameroon is not loyal enough, they can just send troops from Libreville to oust him, right? Or if the president of Burkina Faso is not loyal enough to France, they can just send troops from Abidjan to solve the problem. So there is now another factor in the situation in French-speaking Africa. Is the new element is China, because before 2000, France was quite confident that French-speaking Africa belongs to France. But since China has decided to invest heavily in Africa, it has completely modified the structure. For example, these are the countries where China has invested. The difference between Chinese investment and the French prison, the prisons of France, is that after almost 150 years of colonization of Africa, the result is almost invisible. There is no development. The poverty has escalated, but only after 50 years of investment in Africa, of Chinese investment in Africa, we can see they build, there's lots of investment. For example, they build mega cities, lightweight train, okay? So people of Africa can see this and compare and feel that it's better, they're better off with China than with France. And the problem is that the advantage is that China does not require these countries to respect human rights and democracy, right? And that's the problem. And since China does not require that, they would prefer to deal with China. And now, how does France react to that? Since France is not actually able financially and even militarily to continue the same politics that they, the same foreign policy that they applied in Africa during from 1960 to, let's say, to 2000, what they do now, they just want to make sure that these countries do not fall into the hands of China. And one way of doing this is just to deal with the current dictators as long as they will preserve their interests, right? And there is an example where there are several examples. For example, in Cameroon, there is a port, a deep sea port that is being built in Kribi, and the port has been built, or is being built by China, but the main requirement by France was that if China builds the port, we are the people who are going to run that port. Okay, so it's not going to fall into the hands of Cameroonians, right? Even though there is a Cameroonian who will be the director of the port is logistically run by Bolloré, right? That's another aspect, and I think, oh, come on. Okay, I think I will stop here since we don't have enough time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, before we turn to the question, I would like to ask you a question about how we have pretty grim picture of democracy. But yeah, how did you in Burkina Faso succeed where many other countries are still marginal?
I think we have many reasons. The first reason is maybe the history of democracy in Burkina Faso. First, the Burkina Faso has never experienced the one-party system, and the union and the civil society have always been powerful in Burkina Faso. This is the first one. The second is in Burkina Faso, we don't have, I talked about that, ethnical problem in Burkina Faso. So all the difficulty are easier to be solved if there is no problem, the ethnical problem. I think these two things help us to make the resistance.
Thank you very much. I have many other questions that I think it's better that I give the floor to anybody who wants to.
I don't need a microphone.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
We know that ISIS threatens democracies in northern Africa. What is the role of ISIS in Central and Western Africa? Could it possibly threaten those new democracies, or are they safe?
Yeah, Dominic wants to see the role that ISIS is going to play in democracies in Francophone Africa, with the emergence of ISIS in Africa today, the inroad of ISIS in Africa.
Thank you for this question, because it emphasizes what we've been talking about in terms of the military capacity of French-speaking Africa. Since France dominates these countries militarily, it never gave the possibility to this own country to develop their own powerful military or defense system. And even if they wanted to develop one, it would have sounded as a threat to France, and France would have stopped them from doing that. So over the decades, these countries lived under the French umbrella without really thinking about building their defense system. And the consequence, when the regime in Libya collapsed with the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, all the weapons that fell into the hands of terrorist groups in northern Mali, all those weapons could circulate very easily all the way to, let's say, northeastern Nigeria. If you see here is Cameroon. Cameroon is here, and there's a terrorist group here called Boko Haram, and there are other terrorist groups in northern Mali. So these weapons circulated very easily and fell into the hands of those terrorist groups. So the fact that they were not able to build a strong defense system, it just made it easy for ISIS to invade. Can it threaten democracy? Of course, that's what happened in Mali. Because President Touorizou was actually ousted after a coup, and right away the terrorist groups invaded that area. But also we have seen there have been terrorist attacks in Ouagadougou, in Abidjan, and this also might represent a great threat for democracy. On the other hand, I think those presidents, they also use it as a tool now to, how can I say it, to blackmail Western powers and say, okay, we are the people who can actually defend terrorism, so you better keep us in power.
Yeah, to add a little detail to what you said, mentioning the terrorist attack in Ouagadougou on January 15th this year, when the attack took place in the hotel and where the terrorists were pulled in, we had to wait for a French detachment in Bamako to come and help. Otherwise, the people in Ouagadougou was the police, the gendarmes, it's an army branch. They were ready to attack, but France said, no, don't attack, wait for us. Yeah, while they were still killing people in the hotel, they said, oh, don't wait, don't attack. We have a detachment that is coming in 2 or 3 hours. That's what happened, right?
Yes, but the problem was that there was also American military in Ouagadougou, and the France ambassador did not want the American military to intervene, and then and then they wait for French military to come in Ouagadougou when the Burkinabe military were ready to intervene. But the problem is that those countries, we don't have really professional army to protect countries. Generally, the army was just to protect the president against his own people. Yeah. But now, with the change, those countries are not meant to defend themselves against ISIS. This is a real problem. And maybe it won't be only militarily to solve the problem. If not, the countries are not really the means to do that.
Yes? You want the microphone?
No, I don't need the microphone.
Okay, thank you.
I really appreciate that question because the presence of those terrorist groups in Central Africa and other parts of Africa really reinforces the dynamics of dependence on France. They have to step in order to protect us. When there was the problem in Mali, the Malian army could do absolutely nothing until the French came to liberate them. Well, having said that, I've often had this discussion with my friend Jean-Blaise. I happen to believe that the democratic process in Africa has to be organic, like we have it in Burkina in Burkina Faso. I remember an article by Jacques Sustel, a declaration, not really an article, who was the foreign minister of de Gaulle when de Gaulle was in power. He said that the decolonization of Africa was a monumental error because we were not ready for it. There are dictatorships all over, people are poor. And then years later, Jacques Chirac, the former president, also declared that Africa was not really ready for democracy and that it was not a fertile space for democracy because of the tribal compositions of our countries. I think what happened with Burkina Faso succeeded mostly because, like Guy said, there is very little ethnic tension there like you have, or ethnic divisions like you have. So we have had all this discussion. It seems like we are blaming France for all these things. Don't we think it's part of our structures that is really facilitating the presence of France in Francophone country? We are facilitating that in many ways because you are lucky that in Burkina Faso the army is multi-ethnic. There's no national army with a principal ethnic group to protect the prison. So it looks like we are trapped because our very structures are egoism, are selfishness itself, because I cannot believe that a prisoner will stay in power like Bongo. The father was there for 47 years. He took over and has been there for, the father was there for 42 years. He took over and he's ruled for 7 years. That's almost 50 years. And he doesn't want to leave. How do we blame France for that? It's that human selfishness, that instinct to cling to power that is doing these things. It's not so much the West that is holding us back. We have a huge responsibility, a huge role to play in that dynamic.
I really appreciate what you did because we told to people until we continue to blame France, the situation will not change. we have to take our own responsibility to change, to make change in our countries. Because what Jean-Blaise explained about the money, about the military bases in our countries, the countries are not obliged to sign for it. But the leaders, the African leaders, they have their own interest in that, because it's not the interest of the country. So that's why we think that we are dependent from this situation. And then the new leadership we want in Africa is this dependence of mind. You should be independent from France and do your best for the country. What happened in Gabon now? The people of Gabon, they are accusing France where they could change the situation themselves. How can we ask to France to do only the interest of the people of Gabon? They will do their own interest.
Yeah, definitely. And to illustrate what you said, what happened in Burkina Faso, the insurgency that was successful, I'm not sure that France, wanted that to happen. But it did happen because the people knew that they have an agency. It's not just all about structures oppressing us. So it's also up to us to make the decisions in our best interest. De Gaulle himself said that states do not have friends, they only have interest. So if we are waiting for France to come and do our part, we are really backing up the wrong tree. Another question? Yes?
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Kam. I think you ended your initial statement with some powerful words when you said, we don't need strong men, what we need is strong institutions. And so I'm wondering what has happened since the 2015 election specifically, since you have a fairly new party, right? It's the People's Movement for Progress Party, who has simple majority. And so I'm wondering how much progress have they been able to accomplish since they have been in power?
And Henry want to know, when Obama was elected in 2008, his first visit was in Ghana, and he made this very important pronouncement that Africa did not need strong men, but strong people, but strong institutions. And when Blaise Compaoré came to Washington some years ago, he said, no, there is no strong institution without a strong man. And yeah, he was trying to rebut in a very, indirect way. So now, Henry wants to know what progress have we made in this direction since, elections have taken place.
I think the first thing is, for the first time, the elected government have been fairly elected, and the people are confident that they have been fairly elected. And then we say, we don't mind who will be elected, but those who will be elected have to do what they promise to people. If not, we still have the possibility to change. This is for us the most important, because if you have a president, he don't do well, but you can change it. We can change it. It's still there. This was the problem in Africa. For us, those people in power now, they are not too old. They expect to live in Burkina Faso after their term. So we are waiting for them. I think it's a good beginning for us. As soon as a president and his government, they know they are here for at most 2 terms, 10 years, and they should live with us in the same country.
Yeah, actually, in Burkina Faso, this is really the most visible achievement. We have been able to consolidate our constitution. The constitution is no longer a soft wax that everybody will come and mold and shape to his or her will. You come, one term, if you are lucky, second term, then out. If you are not out, we'll oust you.
I want to tell, when we were writing the new constitution, it had not been adopted yet. The young people, they told me, men, we don't have you to protect the Article 37, which is the article about the presidential term limited. We want it to stay like now. And we want to see the person, the next president, we will try to change it. That means they are now confident that the sovereignty is really for the people.
Okay, so thank you very much all for coming. We appreciate your presence, and we really see your presence here as a vibrant sign of support for democracy in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, the three of you, for a very informative conversation about Africa today. We're most grateful for your wisdom and for your coming to Ripon. Thank you all for coming. There'll be a reception now for about 45 minutes in Wind Sink Lounge for you to speak more with our guests. And next week we have two events. We have candidates who are running for office in Wisconsin who are coming. On Tuesday afternoon at 4:15 here, we'll have Sarah Lloyd, who is running for U.S. Congress on the Democratic ticket. And then on Thursday evening at 6:30, we will have Brian Smith, no relation to me, he's the mayor of Warsaw. He will be here. He is running for the state senate of Wisconsin. So we hope to see you all here next week. Thank you for coming.